recovered alcoholic. My name's John.
Hi, John.
Grateful to be here tonight. It's been rushing around all day, and I've been on the road all day, and been kind of like a theme from last week where I felt like I was a little off the beam. This week, in the beginning of the week, I don't know, man. I've just been not feeling those consolations, and that's okay, right? There are going to be period of dryness in the spiritual life, and I got a glimmer of hope today. And it's funny that we're on We Agnostics. I was in between two appointments, and actually going to my second appointment. I get a call about halfway there, and the estimator canceled on me. And I had to call my client, who I believe took time out of work or was going to meet me there at his house in Westerly, and really good people, salt of the earth people. And I told them, I'm like, listen, they canceled on me. There's nothing I could do. And I seemed a little bit upset, I guess. I didn't even realize it at the time. Just like, I can't believe they did that. Messing up my little plans and designs. I don't think I phrased it that way. And he's like, that's okay. You know, we'll talk again soon, John. And I had to reschedule it for 2 weeks out because, I'm in Florida next week with my family. It's a part business trip, part vacation. My stepfather has another firm down there that I do training at. And I make it into a big event. It's my mother's 70th birthday too. And I'm going to bring my family down. So it's going to be good. So I had to push it out for 2 weeks. And I just felt bad because in my line of work, it's when you have bad carriers, they drag it out for like a year, and it's a big toll on a client when their house is destroyed. And I've been dealing with that a lot lately, and he's like, listen, it's okay. So then I hang up the phone, and I'm driving on the highway, and I look down. Probably should have looked at my phone, but I look down. Actually, I don't have it on this phone, but he's like, I talked to my wife, and she said, God is in control. We're not going to worry about a thing. He has us. Can you believe it? And I was like, I started laughing. I'm like, okay, God. Like, I'm in the mix of my day, and I'm just like, boom, okay, I got to get this done. I had the first meeting. That went really well. Everything, like my plans and designs. And like, sure, I start off my morning on my knees. Well, immediately upon awakening, right, I go right to the 11th step. God, direct my attention. Right. This all started, the little seed, the mustard seed of faith in We Agnostics, where, you just have to be willing. You don't even have to believe. That's the good news for anybody atheist or agnostic in here that has a problem with God. Guess what? Can you just show up? We're glad you went through the threshold here. Can you just sit down and listen and just be willing to maybe believe, maybe because I believe, and you don't even have to have a belief. That's what started with me. I started with the mustard seed of faith, that little mustard seed, the smallest seed, and it can grow into a big tree, right? And just amazing. So I look down at this text and I'm like, I'm laughing. I'm like, okay, God, like, thank you. I respond back. I'm like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. Tell your wife I said thank you. For sure, God's will, let his will be done and not mine. I'm not in control, for sure. Thank you for saying that. We'll talk when I come back from Florida. Amazing, right? It's funny how God works. Been feeling this dryness where I'm just like, oh man, am I like really living the spiritual path here? What's going on? Feeling a lot of monotony, and I just like, that concept that I talked about the other week, right? Chop wood, carry water. That's all I'm doing though. I'm still doing the same exact thing that I've been doing. I wake up upon awakening. God, direct my attention, right? Show me where I can be helpful throughout the day. Remove the selfishness. What's going to come up as a problem? Then I start going throughout the day. Maybe have some silence in the car because it's hard for me because I try to live an authentic Christian lifestyle where I have a lot of kids and they're very, very small. I have 4 kids, 5 and under. So there's not a lot of quiet time in the morning, right? And so I get a little bit in the car sometimes, so I try to do that. So I do the same thing every day. Try to call somebody. Like today I called my sponsor just to check in, talk about some fear, a little 10-step things that have come up, right? Just briefly, nothing written out, but just things in my head, really centered around fear regarding work, and being honest. All these principles, right? It's almost like some of the step work that I do with 10, 11, and 12, sure, some of it's formal. But when I'm living in 10, 11, 12, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, for men and women that have gone through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's like breathing almost. If I'm in the middle of that, it's just a part of my nature. There's a guy I respect in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a circuit speaker, and I've met him before a couple of times, and he talks about it's who I be. And we're not talking about things that are grammatically incorrect. It's part of my being. Breathe in, breathe out. It's just every part of my fiber and body is about God. Whether I feel that or not is irrelevant. Because of all this time that's passed and my experience with that one and true and living God, that I know he's got my back, whether I feel it or not. But we agnostics, it doesn't even matter if you believe. And that's what we're pitching here. That's what we're talking about. My faith has developed over time. 47, that first paragraph. Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. Yeah, that was me. Like, I think back and like when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, like for the last time, God willing, this last round, right? If the Lord wills it, I just wanted to stop drinking. I was so beaten down. Like, I lived that first step. You didn't have to break down the mechanics of the first step for me. I was utterly hopeless from that mental obsession because, like, I always drank again, even in Alcoholics Anonymous after a brief period of sobriety. You do that for a prolonged period and you go in and out, in and out, in and out. You're going to have some pain. I experienced some pain because of that. As a result of that, that drove me to be open to this power greater than myself. Listen, I call it God. I call God because just like that reading, it's that portion of the book on that first paragraph on 47 at the bottom, my understanding has developed over time. What it was when I came in the beginning, I didn't know what it was. I had this misconception of what I thought God was. And I talk about misconception because I was so blocked at that time when I came in of what I thought God was based on my childhood, based on my experiences. I could tell you every single thing that was wrong about my childhood faith. I could list it out. I could tell you all the hypocrisy, just like it talks about that we read today, right on 46. We looked upon the world of warring individuals, first paragraph of 46. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, in inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? Right? So we're talking about they're talking about a little bit of the hypocrisy there in one sentence. It was like, I could list that all out. Like, I went to a parochial school, a Catholic school local, and there was a dude who was like a molester, and like we went to high school together. So it came out later on when I hope he repents and finds the Lord, but like, I could tell you about all these things that are wrong with the church, wrong with the body of the church, all these things, right? But like, the reality was I was blocked from God. So like, when I came in here, I was just you brought up like God. It talks about in the literature, and arose a certain antipathy or something. Like, I felt it in my gut. It was burning. It was just like, I'd hear that name and I would just tense up, right? Just like get almost flex. Just like my whole body's tense. Oh. I could get some of the concepts that people talked about in here, spirit of the universe, etc. I don't believe in that today. It's listed in the literature. We read it today. Who cares? Theological terms don't matter in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That's a conversation after the meeting. When the meeting stops, we can have that conversation. I hope you all come to the truth and know the truth, but that's not what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. It's just, am I open to this idea of God? Am I open to something that's not myself, a power greater than myself. But I truly have to believe in that first step concept. We read it tonight, top of 44. Chapter 4, we agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. We talked about that a lot, right? The last couple of weeks. We talked about that. I think it was There's a Solution. What was it? 20 and 21. The moderate drinker, the real alcoholic, the hard drinker. Just pounded. We've been pounding that, right? And they say it one last time. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. So just to be clear, we're going to wrap it up. I had this college professor when I was in college, and he taught business law, and he was like, state what you're going to say the first time, go over the summary, so that's the second time, and then end with the conclusion. Alcoholics Anonymous, for the first step, goes into it like how many, countless number, hundreds of times. But they're really capping it off here. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. I want to stay stopped permanently, but I cannot. Do I have experience with that? What's that look like in my life? What are these examples? I gave you a lot of those examples for me, right? Where I wanted to stay quit entirely. A lot of it was legal stuff in the beginning when I was like 18. Then it was, my mom doing it for her. Then it was the girlfriends. Then it was me because I was scared I was going to lose my life in a bar, like all these things, right? And but I wanted to quit entirely, but I couldn't do it. And I was coming to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous too. I just wasn't really willing to go deep into myself. In this chapter later on, I'm going to be in Florida, but Joey's going to go over it, right? You have to look inwardly to find that power. We search deep down within ourselves, but he was there. And I didn't want to do that. I would tell you facially, I'd be like, yeah, I could pray. I'd say a couple of prayers, but they were either foxhole prayers or something like, maybe I said a prayer like 5 days ago. It was, there was nothing with depth and weight, right? Which is really steps, 3 through 12 or 4 through 9, whatever it is. That spiritual path. Or if when drinking, you have little control of the amount you take. Once I put booze in my body, I have little control of the amount I take, right? I don't stop at 6. I don't stop at 3. I can't stop at 1. I don't know what's going to happen. One night, I might black out and have 8 or 9. The next night, I might drink a 30-pack and then have glimpses, but then pass out. I'm always drinking until utter blackout, whether willingly or unwillingly. That was my experience. So I had little control of the amount I take once I put booze in the body. Check. Then what's it say? You are probably alcoholic. Okay. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Oh, man. You telling me it's about God? Oh, but I have these conceptions of my childhood God and what I think God is. I don't want to hear that, right? For me, the last time around, about 11 and a half years ago, I was just like second step, like, sure, let's do it. I was so beaten down. Like, when you're utterly powerless and you got no more road to run, it's like, yeah, I'm willing to believe in this conception, and maybe this conception will restore me to sanity, however limited that is. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of what? Of the hopeless variety. Remember we talked about it in the beginning, right? Hopelessness. That is one of the key concepts of that first step. I got to get there. But I can only get there with bitter experience. For me, it was only, quote unquote, out in the field that brought me to that. Where I'm like, wow, I can't even, it was that story that I shared with you in Block Island when it was my quote unquote last debauch, just like Bill talks about, where it was July 3rd and I wake up, or July 4th, I wake up in the morning and I don't know what happened to me, and some guy comes up on his dinghy, and he has my Nike Air Max, and comes up to my buddy's boat. We're moored right in Old Harbor in Block Island. He's like, oh, here's your shoe. I'm like, oh, thanks. I don't even remember what happened at that point. Now I have snapshots if I think back on it, right? Like those like Polaroid flashcards in my mind. But then I just utterly black. I don't remember what happened. I'm like, what happened? He's like, oh, you almost drowned with all your clothes on, and you're swimming in Old Harbor for 2.5 hours. How'd you learn swimming? Because you're a very strong swimmer, but you were taking on water, so I jumped in 3 o'clock in the morning, and I brought you to your friend's boat. And in that moment, I felt like the biggest piece of garbage. Now listen, that wasn't the first time something like that had happened. This was one of the last times something like that happened. You follow me? It was just these, and I talked about it a lot through this talk, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, the first up of these incomprehensible demoralizations. Just strings of them. Arrests, waking up in the jail cell with 4 charges on me. My mom crying, at night, don't go out to the ocean, miss. Then I come back, and then, 4 or 5 months later, and I'm driving over the Newport Bridge in a blackout 5 times in a row. I wake up in the morning, I'm living in my mom's shed, and she has AA pamphlets all over the place. She doesn't say a word. These incomprehensible demoralizations. Another fight with her. I lost another sweet relationship, just like our book says, right? Pissed off everybody in my friends group, and I can't go to another friends group now because I wore out all my welcome. Sound familiar? That was my life. Just take alcohol out of the equation. I was a master manipulator, at least in my head. I thought people just thought I was an asshole. Sorry to use that terminology, but it's true. Selfishness and self-centeredness. We'll get to that in the 3rd step. That brought me to a place of hopelessness. It was just that culmination on July 4th, 2012, where I was just like beaten down, like someone took a bat over my head and just raked me through the coals. Where I admitted to my innermost self, like we read about a couple weeks ago or last week, and I think it was more about alcoholism, so it was last week. 30. We had to learn that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. I came to that on that boat in that morning. I shared to you, I think, this before, but I literally felt like I wanted to die. I wanted to kill myself on that boat on July 4th. I lost all my keys, my wallet. In my innermost self, I knew I could never drink normally. It was never going to happen in my life. It's the best way I can describe it. At the time, I couldn't articulate it like that. Looking back on it now, that's how I felt. There's no way I'm going to be able to drink normally, dude. There's no way I can stay stopped because I'm in AA and I can't stay stopped. Where do I go from here? The old timers say this is the last house on the block. Where the hell am I going from here? I felt utterly doomed. I knew it was death or whatever, jail or whatever. That's hopelessness. That's utter hopelessness. Back to 44 in that middle of that paragraph. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. They're not easy. But on July 4, 2012, when I was on that boat in Block Island, everything drenched and I lost everything, my wallet and all that, just the latest incomprehensible demoralization. It was an easy alternative at that point. Now, I didn't come into Alcoholics Anonymous for another 3 months, right? August, September, October, my sobriety date. But I knew at that point it was up. I lived, and I told you this when we went through Bill's story, I lived Bill's story when he said, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. Alcohol is my master. The ocean stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. Alcohol was my master. That's real. I get a little emotional thinking about it. I haven't thought about that like that in a while. I don't ever want to go back to that. I just felt like life wasn't worth living. I don't know if you guys can relate to that. I felt like life, who cares if I died? I don't have a family. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to have a family. How am I going to be accountable to a wife and to kids if I just get blackout and almost die every weekend? It's funny, right? Isn't that funny? Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. Alcohol was my master. I was doomed to an alcoholic death. But then it gives us a little bit of hope if anybody's ever been there before. The next paragraph. But it isn't so difficult. Oh, it's not. About half of our original fellowship was exactly that type. What type? Agnostic and atheist. I wasn't an atheist, right? I just felt like I didn't deserve God. And I would try to reject any sort of conception you'd throw at me. But I knew that there was a God that was real and that existed. At first, some of us was trying to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. I lived that way since I was like 16, 17. I'll beat this someday. I hope I'm not the real deal. But when I came in, when I was 18 or 19, and I was in that rehab in Florida, and that meeting came in to the inpatient, when I was at the inpatient in Juno Beach, I knew that when I told you, they read The Real Alcoholic. I think, what was that on? There Is a Solution on 21. And I was convicted. I knew. I didn't want AA, but I knew I was an alcoholic. I couldn't escape it. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So if you're an atheist or an agnostic, or you have trouble with God in here, don't be disconcerted. Don't worry about it. Can you just show up? Do you think you could trust another man if you're a man, or another woman if you're a woman, and just sit down with them if they have something you have? We read about it in There's a Solution. I think the beginning of There's a Solution, right? But the ex-problem drinker who's found the solution, who's properly armed with the fact about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of an alcoholic in a few hours. Do you see someone who's properly armed with the facts about themselves? Maybe believes they're an alcoholic and has been sober a little bit, had a spiritual experience. You see the light and the fire in their eyes like Ebby. Can you grab onto them and just ask them in all humility, can you help me? Whether you believe or not is irrelevant. You don't have to believe. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to love you until you believe. I'm going to love you and give you all the love that I have. I'm going to give you not the same, but the close to the same love that I have for my wife and kids. I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to dedicate my time. I'm going to bring you through this process. I'm going to give you everything I got. I'm going to share with you God. Can you just be willing? Can you just be open to that fact? Second paragraph. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power that we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. So this book, it references what this book is about a couple of times. On this page, it's about finding that power, right? Lack of power, that's my dilemma. I could look at my experience and say, with the drink, without the drink, all this lack of power that I have. At that point in my life, listen, it still comes up daily, the lack of power. It's still my dilemma, right? But I can think back to 11 or 12 years ago and like, yeah, dude, a lack of power. Yeah, for sure. That's my dilemma. I can't, lack of power. I have no power in keeping a job. I can't keep a job. I can't show up on time. I burn through jobs. I've had 27 jobs in, my first 28 years of life. That's not normal. 27 years of life. That's not normal. I can't keep one more than 2 months. I can't keep a relationship more than 2 months. She leaves me. I always embarrass myself with friends. I always think about myself. No one wants to hang out with me. A lot of that is self-pity and fear, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, lack of power. My parents are never happy with me, and I feel like I can just never live life successfully. With alcohol, for sure, yeah, lack of power. I can't control the amount I take. I can't stop at one. Yeah, I want to stay stopped. I tried. I went back to AA. I always drink. I leave the meeting and I go to the liquor store. What's wrong with me? I must be insane. Based on my track record, know that one more drink could end my life, or put me in the ACI, or put me in Butler, or just have me live a terrible life for the next 60 years until I die of cirrhosis of the liver. But I still can't stay stopped permanently. Yeah, I'm hopeless. Yeah, I lack power. Obviously. It had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? That means we have written a book we consider to be spiritual as well as moral. Right? And then they start talking about the God idea. 46, 3 paragraphs in. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach, to effect a contact with him. Wow. That's a big paragraph right there. So can I lay aside my prejudice on whatever I think God is based on my misconceptions or conception of what I think God is based on my childhood or lack thereof of a conception? A lot of people nowadays, in the age we live in, are raised with no God. They have no idea of God. Some people have some sort of religious discipline that they're raised with. Some people have some sort of New Age belief from their parents. Who knows? Right? Whatever it is. And whatever qualms you have with that, can you lay that aside? Because we're looking for a new experience with God. And it doesn't matter about my conception. When it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, I want to be very clear. When it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous and salvation from alcohol, that's irrelevant. Now, when we leave the threshold and this meeting is done, I'll talk to you about salvation of your soul when we leave here. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about salvation of alcohol, because with God, there's a wide path. And we read about it later on. We found that God does not make too hard terms for those that seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To all those who earnestly seek, it is open, we believe, to all men. So whatever our conception, maybe we don't even have a conception. You know what? I would even contend that's okay. Can you make contact? We hear it a lot. So even in middle of the road meetings, right? We hear a lot of truisms that you might not know how they get there. So you hear it like, I've heard like, believe because I believe. Yeah, for sure. Can you do that? Maybe not my God or whatever conception, who cares, but can you at least affect a contact? Can you go home tonight? Whatever your misconception is, are you dying from alcoholism? Are you utterly hopeless? Do you have experience with that? If so, can you be willing and maybe just shoot a prayer out? Like I remember, I don't remember the first couple of weeks because I was just so hazy, but I remember a couple of months down the line and just being like, okay, whatever you are, whoever you are, I'm willing, because like I got nothing left. The prayer of the desperate man. I have nothing, like I don't know. Like this is what AA people are telling me. I don't know who you are, what you are. My parents got divorced. I have this problem with you. My mom left me. She moved to Florida. I don't feel this way anymore, by the way. I don't play the victim role anymore. But this is how I felt at the time. And I'm like, my mom moved to Florida. She left me. She abandoned me. How could a God who loves me so much take the only thing that I cared about away and move her 2,000 miles away from me? And she was the only stabilizing force in my life when I was a child. God, you abandoned me. That's how I felt. But in my room, just being like, okay, whatever, let's lay that aside. Like, I remember it, just like, I don't know who you are, what you are. I don't even know if I believe you, but can you keep me sober today? Because I know I can. Thank you. That was my first couple of prayers. Then at night, it was just like, thank you for keeping me sober. There's a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous that I really respected in the beginning. He's passed on. His name was Jet. He used to go to the nooner meetings in North Kingstown. And he had the simplest message when it came to step 2 concepts. And I didn't even realize it was step 2 concepts at the time. He used to talk about, I'm probably going to butcher it, but God forgive me. He, I think, was living in a loft at the time or something when he was first sober. And these people in the meeting were telling him to get on his knees and ask the power greater himself to keep him sober today. So in the morning, I think he said he'd throw his keys under the bed. So he'd get down on his knees. And then he said, God, power greater himself, can you keep me sober today? God, can you keep me sober today? He'd go about his day. And then at night, he had that first day of sobriety or he'd say, thank you, that was awesome. And then he started having weeks and months. And then he started having faith in that power that he didn't even know he believed in. That at the end of the night, he would say this. I remember it as clear as day with his white hair and this goatee. And he would say, it's a done deal. I know it's a done deal that he would be sober, right, if he asked in the morning. Because he had that experience of God protecting him and him not drinking. From willing to believe to belief. So once again, we found that God does not make too hard terms for those that seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidden. To those who earnestly seek, it is open, we believe, to all men. It talks about in the scriptures, knocking it in, he will open, ask and he will grant. I'm butchering that, but that's a spiritual axiom. It's true, right? And I believe that to be true. Can I just put in the action? Because in my experience, I had this misconception of who God is. And then, like I talked about before, that I start believing things that seem entirely out of the reach. I had this misconception of my childhood God, and listen, take this or leave it, who cares? But I could tell you all these bad things and societal things on why, the way of the world, on why they're bad and all that. And, I go through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could tell you all these conceptions of God to me is just like Bill described it as the spirit of the universe. I latch onto that. Now I would say that he created that universe. That's a whole nother theological concept. But that being said, right, and then I get married. I go through the 12 steps. I make these amends. I have this crazy experience with God. I'm lit up. And then, I meet my wife at Nekipa on the host committee. Shout out Nekipa, go to the dance, right? Yep. Prom. So, I want to get married, and then I know this guy who was literally the salt of the earth. He always helped me. He wrote letters to the judge whenever I would get arrested and be facing time. He'd always be there, want nothing in return. He would give my time, when I would have a problem, and I didn't even believe. He was a priest locally, and very, very holy man. And so I sat down with him, and I'm like, I don't know if I believe in what you believe, but can you marry us? He's like, yeah, you got to believe in what we believe to marry you. Okay? You can't just sit up there and not believe. I can't do that. In good conscience, I'm a priest. I'm like, okay. So when he started breaking down my objections to the faith. And I had all these objections. And my wife was sold that meeting. Absolutely sold. And I wasn't still. He said, okay, just come to Mass and sit in the back. And don't receive the Eucharist, but sit in the back. And listen, take this or leave it. This is outside the scope of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I want to show you where I came from to where I am now. Right, in my spiritual life, and my discipline, and where God has taken me, because he can take you to great and beautiful things that when you come into here, you think are completely attainable, would never happen. If you told me to bet $1 million on this, and I had $1 million, I would put my money down, no problem, even if it was my last dollar, because I would tell you there's no way I'm going back to that faith, no way. So I sit down with him, and he's telling me, so I'm going back to Mass, I'm sitting there, and the Lord keeps giving me these consolations that I can't escape from. So I get my feet washed on Holy Thursday, in the Novus Ordo, they do that on Holy Thursday. And basically, I had like a white light experience. And my left side went numb, and it went from my feet all the way to probably my hip. And it went numb for a 24-hour period. So God's just like, keep denying me. And this is after going through the book 2 different times, 2 different ways, doing these amends, getting lit up by God. And so then I'm convicted that, yeah, this is the right path. And then I have a crazy consolation on my marriage date. And I'm not going to get into that. But Christ was essentially like, keep denying me. I was basically like the doubter St. Thomas, where he, after Christ resurrected, he said, oh, go ahead and put your hand in my wound if you really want to believe. And then he says, blessed are those who believe and not see. Right? So I was like St. Thomas, where I needed some sort of miracle to see. How about the people that don't see and don't need that consolation? Right? Blessed are they. And I became full force. And I try to bring people into the faith, and I've seen conversions and all that. I go to a traditional Latin Mass, 1962. It's all done in Latin. Pre-1962 Vatican II Council. It's right up the street, and it's all done in Latin. And my whole spiritual life is centered around that. If you told me that 11 years ago, that's where I would be, I'd say, no way. You're crazy. There's no way. Because what I think is good for me may not be good for me. And what I think is bad for me, it may be bad for me. What I think is good for me may not be good for me. What may be bad for me may not be bad for me. The reality is I have no idea. But am I willing to believe and listen to the Spirit and see where I need to go? The problem is if I turn my back on God, then I'm going to suffer the consequence. But in the beginning, no, the path is very narrow now for me. It's a very narrow path. The things that I could get away with before, I can't get away with anymore. So yes, in the beginning, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive. For sure, God just wants a relationship with us. And just if you're here and you don't know if you believe, great, we're glad you're here. But now, it's a little bit different. And that's okay. I'll end with this, 47, middle of the paragraph. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. This is the second step question. And I ask my guys this when we go through it, when we get there. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? So, do I believe? Oh, you know what? Scratch that. Are you even willing to believe? Like, you have no belief, but do you think that maybe one day you might be able to get there? That's a wide path, bro. That's a wide path, my bro. I don't know why I just said that, but I'm trying to have Jesse like me, so. I'm sorry I never got back to your text today, too bad. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. So if I'm working with a guy, right, and I say, okay, so Do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe that there's a power greater than yourself? Yeah, I believe, or I'm willing to believe. Then I say to him, well, I emphatically assure you that you are on your way. And then I stop there. We go to the third step. If they say no, then we read the rest of We Agnostics. Listen, we might touch on concepts. There are important concepts in the back, like 54. Joey's going to be going over that, the bedevilments. There are other important concepts towards the end of We Agnostics. I kind of go into that, right? Like 53, is God everything or is nothing? That's the choice it's going to be. He's going to go into that. A lot of this is really apologetics to the atheist or the agnostic. Like, hey, can you just even be willing to believe? Here are some good reasons why. Joey's going to go into that next week when I'm in Florida. But all you have to do is be willing to believe in whatever conception that is in the beginning. Because I guarantee you, once you abandon yourself to God, and really how you do that is writing, and you lean into that writing, and then you share that fifth step when you're done, and then you go out and make amends. What's it say in the 12th step? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So can I at least do the footwork? And in my experience, God's going to get me there. You will get there. I believe that if you withhold nothing and you're as honest and as willing and as fearless as you can be, the Lord will never let you down. I believe that. He's never let me down. He's never let down the people closest to me. He'll put you on his back because he loves you unconditionally. And hopefully, if I work with an atheist or agnostic, I can show you that love and I can reflect that to you. Hopefully, and you'll see it by my actions rather than the words. I hope that to be true. Thank you.